Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Film Nerd Podcast. I'm Vince, and I'm joined by two guests. I got Daniel and Mikey. How you guys doing? Coming back, returning after Army of the Dead, Zack Snyder's Justice League. How you guys doing?
Good. Doing good, man.
Deja vu for us here. If you're listening, we actually already recorded this once. The episode you're going to hear is split up into two very distinct portions. We're all going to be wearing different clothes because we had recorded all of this originally, and the local recording on my computer, insufficient space, screwed up the first 35 to 40 minutes of this episode, unfortunately. So what you are hearing right now is a redo that we already did once. So if it doesn't sound as impassioned or as excited as the rest of the conversation, it's because we already did this. So unfortunate as that is, we're going to make it work to the best of our ability here because this is a series we're all pretty excited about doing this year. And so the series that we are starting, brand new, is talking about everything Lord of the Rings. Amazon Studios has a Lord of the Rings TV show supposedly coming out at the end of this year. We have talked, and we don't know if that's going to happen. We're kind of hypothesizing that it might end up getting pushed because they still have not put out any teasers, trailers, or an official release date. So all three of us kind of are assuming that even though they said late 2021, I'm going to guess it's probably going to end up 2022. Fingers crossed. Hopefully it comes out this year, but I'm not keeping my hopes up. So in the meantime, we are going to talk about everything Lord of the Rings that's been released to the big screen and the TV and the small screen, television screen, starting with 3 animated films. The first 3 attempts at adapting J.R.R. Tolkien's source material, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, came out in 1977, 1978, and 1980. 3 animated films. 2 of them are directly connected. Another one was kind of independently made of the other 2, and so we'll kind of get into that later in our conversation here. So what we lost from our original conversation is just the first film. We're going to kind of go back over our thoughts on that, and then it's going to seem a very, very jarring transition where we're going to all be wearing different clothes, and Daniel, I think, is in a different location in the later portion of the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube.
Different apartment, different location.
So anyway, we're going to try and keep this quick because all of us are just trying to squeeze this in on a Friday afternoon, just so I can get this video edited out hopefully next week. So the first movie here is The Hobbit from 1977. Animated musical television special. It was actually not released in theaters, and it was adapted by NBC, was the network that it was put out on, and it was done by a studio, the studio that animated it, that would later go on to become Studio Ghibli after they went bankrupt in the 80s. Basically was a predecessor of Studio Ghibli. Made on a budget of $3 million. Put out in just around Thanksgiving time, 1977. This was the first ever attempt at adapting anything extensively by J.R.R. Tolkien in terms of a movie. So again, this was a television film. So what you guys, I know, again, if you're listening, we actually already talked about this, but we'll just go around the circle here really quick and talk about our thoughts again, unfortunately repeating. Mikey, I know you really enjoyed this movie when we had already talked about it. You want to share your thoughts again on 1977's The Hobbit?
Well, since 2 days ago now, I actually hate this movie, so...
What?
No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, I was gonna say, man, I should have caught the sarcasm.
I really enjoyed this movie. This was my favorite of the 3 animated movies that we watched. Just generally speaking, I thought it was funny. I thought it was quick, to the point. Summarized a lot of kind of the little side quests and adventures that are scattered throughout the 3 live action movies. I rather enjoyed this. I hadn't seen this since I was like 8 or 10 years old, that time frame. So I had like kind of glimpses of it in my mind from back then, not really remembering the whole movie or anything. But I remember enjoying it. And then the main thing I remembered was Gollum. Gollum was terrifying as a kid. And
still is kind of freaky as an adult.
Yeah, that holds up. Gollum is absolutely terrifying to this day in this movie. He's a little bit more like, I guess, frog-like in this, which is a little different from any other interpretation.
Frog-like, hairy. He's got some hair on him.
Yep, he has these glossed over eyes that look like they're cataract. The
Yeah,
music
he almost comes off as blind.
Yeah.
Just about.
Have you
Yeah,
guys,
wait.
Mikey,
What?
you've seen the movie The Descent. I watched it with you, right?
Oh, dude.
Do you remember the
great
creatures
movie.
from that?
No,
Yeah.
that's a great. It is kind of like, except with hair.
Yeah,
Yep.
Some hair.
The Descent.
That's a great
that's
horror
in like
movie.
that's in my like top 20 horror movies.
Oh, that's a great. I love that horror movie.
Great movie. But yeah, I liked this a lot. I thought the music was great in it too. I didn't think at any point in time the music was like out of place or jarring. I thought it was just a fairly lighthearted tale, fun for all ages, and very different from the live action movies, the Hobbit movies, which I'm kind of lukewarm on. So this is a nice change of pace from those, and it's, like I said, it's kind of short and sweet, and I think kind of more what I want out of the Hobbit story.
Yep.
So I enjoyed it.
Daniel.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead. You got something
The
else.
art direction. The art direction.
Oh yeah. I can't believe you didn't mention that. That's your favorite part.
I know, that's my favorite part of this movie. Beautiful backgrounds in this. They're all done in watercolor, just beautiful watercolor, kind of in more of like a loose style. I was kind of explaining it before, where you introduce a lot of water onto the canvas. So it kind of takes the pigment in kind of random, sporadic directions. So it has like a really free-flowing...
It's very unique visually.
Yeah.
It doesn't
It's
look like anything
beautiful.
Disney was doing at the time. It's very distinct.
Yep. Yeah, even compared to some of Disney's later fully animated movies, just beautiful hand-painted backgrounds that kind of have this loose style that's just absolutely beautiful. And the foreground figures as well are also beautifully rendered. A lot of awesome line work, a lot of like wrinkles and textures in the clothing and face and things like that you don't normally see in animated movies. So I definitely appreciated all of that and enjoyed looking at it throughout the whole thing. So
how about you, Danny boy?
Yeah, it was definitely fun. Kind of reminds me of some of the, like you were mentioning, Vincent. I'm not sure if this I guess these producers, you said they worked with like some of the older cartoons, like was it like Frosty the Snow, or what was it?
This studio prior, the animation studio prior to this project, had done like the Little Drummer Boy, I think.
Yeah.
They had done a lot of those like really old holiday specials.
Yeah, and that's exactly my point, is that it kind of has that feeling to it with the art and the way the characters are portrayed and kind of the dialogue and just like how they go about recreating each scene and stuff. So I had that feel to it. I'm not saying it's a holiday movie by any means, but watching those growing up, I kind of had that aura along with it. But I thought it was definitely fun. Of the movies that we watched, I enjoyed The Lord of the Rings the most, but like I was mentioning before, I would probably rewatch this one.
Before The Lord of the Rings.
Before I would The Lord of the Rings or The Return of the King. Just because, like Mikey mentioned, I think the first Hobbit movie was good. The second one and the third one, not so good, but there were things about it that I enjoyed. But as far as a whole movie, bringing it all together, I would almost watch this one versus those. And then I think in the movie, we brought up the fact that the artwork was so well done. And I remember, Mikey, he's obviously studying art, so he knows a lot more of the details than we do. But I mean, at least from a naive perspective, I could tell it this was pretty detail oriented, like with mentioning the line work, the backdrop and stuff. So I thought that was really neat. The soundtrack was decent too. But the thing that we spoke about before that I'm trying to recall on was the differences between the Peter Jackson universe and this one, and the fact that each director had their own portrayal of what the characters looked like. So for this Hobbit here, the elves were almost like had an alien look to them. Obviously not alien, but they had their own unique look to them. The dwarves, were almost like they were very human looking. And just some of those other features that, like Vincent brought up beforehand. The orcs had like a weird rabbit/rodent.
Well, I don't. There's no orcs in the Hobbit, though, isn't it? Just
or
goblins?
not. I meant the goblins.
Yeah,
the
goblins. Yeah. which is something that I'll complain about the next movie is, or not complain about in the next movie, but I'll complain about with this. No, it's the last movie. It's the last movie that I complained because they didn't distinguish between the two. So that conversation's later, but
exactly. So no, those are just kind of my, some of my thoughts kind of summarized together of the whole movie. But I mean, I thought it was enjoyable. As a 28-year-old, watching a cartoon for the first time is a little different, but it was enjoyable. It's something that we spoke about before. We probably, show our kids at some point in time, or something on those lines. Yeah.
Well, and I even forgot to mention Mikey was the only one who had seen this before we watched it together. Mikey was the only one of us who had seen it before as a kid.
Yeah,
I had never watched it. Daniel said he had never watched it. And I had never even heard of these movies. I was not aware of any of them, these 3 animated films, until doing deep dives like in high school or college. Once I really got into like going on the internet and reading about movies and TV shows and getting into that stuff, and then I was like, oh, what are these? This is the first time I'm watching any of them. I didn't dislike this movie, but I think I have the most lukewarm reception out of the 3 of us. When we originally recorded this, my biggest praise for this is just the being so intimidating, and like in terms of trying to take this source material for the first time and just create something brand new. We'll talk about later our discussion coming up.
They're the pioneers.
Yeah,
they're the pioneers of the
Ralph
Lord of the Rings universe.
Ralph Bakshi, who does the next film that we'll have a discussion here on. That's something he talked about a lot and was pretty bitter towards Peter Jackson having his film as a blueprint, whereas the people making these animated films, no one had ever done this before. So you gotta appreciate them, being the first people to try and adapt this source material that's so beloved. But I, as an adult, I love animation. I still, I watch a lot of animated movies. I just watched the new Pixar film Luca. I like Soul. Mikey and I really liked Wolfwalkers. I watch animated stuff, movies and TV shows all the time. But this film is very much catered towards kids. The book is a children's book, whereas Lord of the Rings is far more dense and for adults, really. But this movie really does feel like a children's film. But I don't think it panders. I think it does a good job of summarizing. That's one of my biggest problems, but that's not really their fault. There's nothing they can do, about having 77 minutes, to try and get all of this source material into one 77-minute movie. And I think with the time they have, that they do a pretty decent job of, giving as much as they can. But
and that's one thing too, is that that's what separates this from Peter Jackson. The Peter Jackson version, not only did it include a lot of things in the book, but it added a lot of nonsense that wasn't in the book, so he could kind of tie it into his own Lord of the Rings, universe. And I respect that about this movie, that it didn't deviate away from really the storyline or the plot at all. Obviously, it had to summarize a lot into a short movie, but I thought it hit, like Mikey said, all the main points, and I thought it did a good job of, as a kid or even as an adult, I've never heard of these movies or seen them, you could still kind of keep tabs of what's going on throughout the whole movie, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's very easy to follow.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, unlike the final film, which we obviously talk about a little bit later. But my biggest complaint about this movie, when we first recorded this, I talked about the voice performances. I am not really a fan. I feel like the voice performances in this feel very boring and uninspired, and just very exposition heavy. The exposition, in terms of the actual dialogue, again, that's not really. The creators are limited, but the actual performances, how they emote, the intonations, and the variety and how they're speaking. And Mikey, when we first talked about this, said that he felt the guy voicing Bilbo brings a feeling of calm, but I feel like, to me, there's a difference between calm and just like conveying calm as a voice actor, and then just having the exact same voice the entire movie, the whole performance. And we talked about before how I also just feel like voice performance as an art at this time, trying to play devil's advocate, was not nearly as big as it would become in the 80s and 90s, with more and more movies and TV shows, people becoming famous for just their voice performances. That wasn't really there yet. So I also think we talked about this, that the names, the people they hired were not, maybe if they got bigger actors, big names, it might have been a little bit better voice performances. The characters, Gandalf's pretty good, but a lot of the other ones I wasn't big on. Smeagol's was okay. Gollum is okay.
Yeah, I thought Gollum was pretty good.
But it's something else that we talked about when we originally recorded this is it's also very hard going into these and trying to remove, you know, the Lord of the Rings films that Peter Jackson did from our heads. It's very difficult. You know, we have this comparison of all these great performances and visuals and everything, you know, already stuck in our minds. And I think it's challenging to go into this and remove those. So I'm, you know, like something like Gollum, I'm thinking of Andy Serkis' performances. Yeah, his performance is it's challenging in that regard. But I do think overall it's an okay project. Again, I'd probably only watch it again with my kids. I wouldn't go out of my way to probably watch this on my own again. Maybe, I know you made an argument. We're going to talk about the Hobbit films, you know, later this year, but you know, I'm gonna have to see upon a fresh rewatch how I feel about those. But Daniel made the argument with this being 77 minutes. You want to rewatch a visual representation of this story might be better than trying to watch, you know, 6-7 hours of, you know, the Hobbit films that have a lot of fluff.
I would watch this any day over Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy, to be honest.
I can't comment on that until I rewatch them because I've not seen them since they were out in theaters. So I got
actually, I haven't seen those since they were out. I've only seen each one time.
I remember being disappointed, but I remember still enjoying them. I just remember thinking that I remember Daniel and I think saw all of them together. I remember we were like, there's just so much extra.
Yeah, and that's a great description, is that you still enjoyed them, but just being let down and disappointed because they just don't hold up to what the Lord of the Rings were by any means.
Yeah. Well, that's a conversation, obviously, when we rewatch that we'll get into big time. But yeah, so again, very disappointed that I lost our original recording of this conversation. It was a little bit longer, a little bit more impassioned and, you know, fresh, new. Unfortunately, though, we had to re-record this in order to have a complete episode. So
I had more beer in my system that time. And
I was going to say, I just finished cleaning my house and I'm about to go work out. So I'm just we're just trying to squeeze this in. Daniel's got stuff he's got to do. So we're just trying to squeeze this in. But anything else you guys want to add to this conversation? Otherwise, I'll end this, and it's gonna, if you're listening or watching, it's gonna transition to the original recorded conversation from here.
I would just say for people listening, just do a quick Google Images search on this movie, just to look at some of the still shots from it that show some of the beautiful artistic backdrops and some of the art direction in this movie, because it's pretty cool.
Some of the character designs are pretty cool too. Cool.
Just take a couple seconds to just Google it and kind of see what the look of it is. It's pretty astounding.
Yeah, I would agree. Especially, and again, 1977. You got to think, you know, it's a far different time period. You know, compared to even there's not a lot of hand drawn traditional animation in 2021. Unfortunately, we don't see it as much. But when we do, those animation styles are far cleaner and crisper. They're not as crude or rough around the edges. But we talked about originally that kind of rough around the edges adds a quality, you know, more of a charm and a quality to it that is unique, and it's something you can appreciate, I think, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So, well, all right, since these guys got to get going here, and we were just trying to squeeze this in so that the episode would be complete, because we lost the original recording of this conversation. Basically, what you're going to hear next, if you're listening or if you're watching, it's going to transition into us discussing The Lord of the Rings, 1978 animated dark fantasy adventure film by Ralph Bakshi, who is a character of himself that we will talk about in the conversation. Some interesting quotes that he had, but he was the first person ever to try and adapt The Lord of the Rings into a film. This film is completely unrelated from the Hobbit movie we just talked about. Different studio, different animators, different actors, different everything, completely unattached from each other. So that conversation is what you are going to hear next, and I hope you enjoy it. So this movie made almost $40 million at the box office. So it did 10 times its budget, and it was apparently fairly well received. Mixed to positive, and we'll kind of talk about why in just a moment here. The crazy thing about this movie, though, is it had nothing to do with the Hobbit film that we just talked about. Different studio, everyone involved, completely different animation studio, different production studio, different distribution. This is owned by Warner Brothers. Apparently they own all of them now. At the time, this was distributed by United Artists, who I believe Warner Brothers bought, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, what do you guys think about this one? So this is my favorite of the three we watched. I don't think it's a great movie. I barely think it's a good movie. But what did you guys think, Mikey? What did you think about this film?
It's
nothing like the other one.
No, nothing like the
stylistically, Hobbit, animation, everything. Everything even the source material obviously is quite a bit different, but
yeah, completely different. I kept checking the time when I was watching this movie. It seemed just like a slog.
I think I did more than once too.
Yeah, I'll say it hit most of the main points that were in Peter Jackson's movies. It hit most of the main points that, as far as I know, are in the books. I've never read the books.
The books are so dense. Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, it did a really good job of staying somewhat true to the source material.
Yep.
But I don't know if you were going to mention this or not, but there's this thing that this director did.
Oh yeah, we're absolutely going to talk about it. We have to talk about it. Since you're the artist, I already figured you'd bring it up, so I'll let you talk about it.
It's called rotoscoping, and basically what they did for this movie, they filmed every single scene in live action with real actors, real people.
Was it every scene?
Every single scene.
They did every scene.
They had a couple parts in the movie where they had animators just freehand some stuff in, but every single moving battle scene, whatever, was shot live action. And then what they did to save money, apparently, was they took those films and they had the artists trace over every single frame in animated style. So you'll notice a lot of the movements in this movie are kind of weird compared to normal animated movies.
The animation in general is just bizarre.
It's very bizarre. Like if you just watch,
it's like you're on drugs.
Every single person is swaying and moving. You'll see fingers moving and feet moving and heads nodding and stuff. It's because they traced every single frame of a real person moving in a scene. Normally in an animated, generally in an animated movie, not CGI, you'll see kind of a character move their hands briefly, and then they'll talk, and then they'll do this. You won't see all this, dexterity and stuff that you saw in this. So it was interesting, and it was kind of groundbreaking at the time, but it was just a little off-putting. Now, the other thing that they did was they did this thing called solarized footage.
Yeah.
And that's where they took those live scenes.
So weird, too.
Yeah, they took those live scenes that they filmed, and instead of animating them, they messed with the the value structure, the lighting, the color, everything.
It's very trippy.
Yeah, very trippy. So it's still actually live action footage. They kind of just messed with all those different levels to make it look kind of animated. And the director debated, the reason he was able to do it was he argued that, you can't have battle scenes with thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah,
animated.
That's what I read. Is his biggest thing was he wanted to make this movie, but he was like, I just don't have the money to do what eventually Peter Jackson would do.
Well, money, and he said it's not even possible in animation, which I think he was kind of full of shit. Because
he was being a little lazy on that aspect.
2 years later, after this, I don't know if you've ever seen Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind,
which is heard of that
Studio Ghibli movie, and that's
you're gonna be very upset with me. I don't think I've ever seen a single Studio Ghibli film.
Dude.
I have Spirited Away on my shelf behind me. I've been waiting for a time to deep dive Studio Ghibli. Oh, we got some Studio Ghibli. Oh, I see Spirited Away right there. I know, dude. I know. It's one of my biggest cinephile sins is that I have not seen Studio Ghibli films. But no, I have not seen that movie.
Phenomenal. So anyways, basically a year and a half, 2 years later, Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind came out and had millions of moving creatures in a huge, an army, basically an army of creatures.
Well, yeah, I mean,
it proved this director wrong.
It wouldn't even be that much later that Akira would come out. Wasn't Akira 85 or something?
Akira,
am I saying it wrong? Akira. I mean, that movie, the animation's insane.
Yeah. So anyways, that was kind of off-putting. And I think my biggest thing, I think it could have worked. I think it had potential if they kind of picked and like chose these specific spots to have that sort of animation, quote unquote. But they did things like, here's the main characters that are animated walking in the scene, and then they'll do like a quick cut, and now they're fully live action with this solarized thing.
It's so weird.
Dude, like pick and choose what you're going to have be this sort of style and stick with it. It was all over the map, all over the board, and it was
sometimes they did all three at once. Like they'd have traditional hand-drawn animation, the solarization, and the rotoscoping all going on at the same time and jumping back and forth scene to scene.
And changing characters constantly.
Yeah.
And
that's one of my biggest criticisms of this film, is how jarring the variety of visuals in terms of the animation. It's a very strange experience.
Right.
And I kind of like it for how weird and unique it is.
Some portions of the movie, but I think it doesn't work enough
as a whole project. I don't think it's like a great movie by any stretch of the word.
Like, I think it worked well with the Nazgul and the Black Knights, or what are they called?
Black Riders.
Black Riders.
Dark Riders.
You guys know a lot more about the mythology than I do, but
I
think it worked well for them. They were terrifying with that sort of solarization put on them.
It's very strange and weird and eerie, some of those sequences. But like the introduction of Strider, Aragorn, that whole sequence in the dancing pony, is such a weird sequence because they have all these live action stuff combined with the traditional animation. It's
the rotoscope.
So weird.
Yes.
Now the other thing I'll say from the art direction, the backgrounds were dog poop.
They're very uninspired.
They're very
the opposite of what The Hobbit had. The Hobbit had very detailed backgrounds. This film, the focus seemed to be more on what was going on in the foreground. They kind of seemed to go, we're just going to forget about what's going on in the background.
Yeah, the backgrounds were very rushed and messy. I think most of them were like acrylic and maybe some oil painting here and there, but I don't think there was any watercolor. But the main thing was that they were just flat. They were flat and muddy and undimensional. So you'd have characters walking around at different depths in this flat background, and it looked like they were just on this shitty piece of paper. Like it just looked fake. They were never in an environment.
There's sometimes where it looks like the characters are just kind of floating like on the background, like they're not really attached to anything. There's some very strange sequences.
Art direction. Huge issue with art. Issue with art direction. And I think the other thing was, this movie was very, very serious. It was more serious than Peter Jackson's movies. Like Peter Jackson,
it's like, I get that this is an animated film, but I feel like they wanted this to be for kids and families, but
it wasn't.
There's like no quips or like one-liners or like lightheartedness.
Nothing.
You know, obviously the next episode we do of this series, we'll be talking about the Peter Jackson his original trilogy, but like, you don't have any kind of the fun, playful banter between the hobbits and with the dwarves, and you know, I don't know. There's kind of those kind of ebbs and flows in Peter Jackson's trilogy, where you get the hardcore violence and intense sequences, but it's always broken up by lighthearted, playful banter and characterization. And this movie, but in this movie, I think its biggest problem goes back to what I said about The Hobbit. The source material is just so hard to adapt if you're limited on time, right? Time and budget. Peter Jackson, I mean, I would hope that we could do the extended trilogies. I mean, he literally had 12 hours, 11 hours of movies for one book. And this movie tried to encapsulate two of the volumes, because technically it's one book broken up into 3 volumes. But this movie tries to do, we didn't even say that yet, this movie tries to adapt the Fellowship and the Two Towers in one movie.
I think there was a lot of wasted
in 2 hours.
There was a lot of wasted time, though. I think.
Yes.
There was, like, if you like, Mikey,
a lot of summarization too. A lot of summary.
A lot of summarizing, but almost when you're watching some of these,
not as bad as the next film.
No. There's scenes from this movie where it focuses in on, you know, like a Hobbit or a Hobbit or two, and it's like Mikey was talking about. You'll see them kind of moving, and it'll just be on them, and then they'll say something, and it'll just be them moving again. And I can't remember how many times I witnessed that happening. And it's just like, well, that didn't even need to be in there, let alone be that long, you know?
Well, Daniel, I was actually going to mention that they said that was an issue with this animation style they were working on, the rotoscoping and solarization, that somehow in production, by them having to trace every single frame, it made voice acting difficult because they had to speed up and slow down different frames to make it
that's
look
interesting.
natural. So what they said was, there would be these awkward 3 to 5 second pauses in between characters talking to each other so that it could match the lips of the actual actors' movements, their mouth movements.
Interesting.
So you're right. There was a lot of wasted time, and it's because of the way they decided to animate this.
Yeah.
Have you seen some of the Ralph Bakshi's quotes in this movie? He's super defensive, like kind of to the point of being an asshole about this movie. I was reading some of the stuff he said, and he gets super angry, like criticisms of this movie. He's very bitter that he did not get a sequel. So we're going to talk about one more animated film here. And what's wild is the last movie we're going to talk about has, just like the Hobbit and the Return of the King, 77 and 80 was the same studio, same crews. This movie is not related to those films at all. And he was planning on this being a part 1 and part 2. He wanted this marketed as Lord of the Rings Part 1, and then he wanted a Lord of the Rings Part 2, because he even said, and I agree with him, it's not possible to adapt that entire novel, all 3 volumes, into one. You could, but it'd be like a 3.5, 4 hour movie. You'd still be missing stuff. Exactly. So I get why he's angry about that he never got his sequel, which is strange because the movie made 10 times its budget. $4 million it was made for. It made around $40 million. So I don't understand why he never got his sequel. But
most critics demolished this movie, from what I heard.
I saw it was mixed. I saw there's some people who really liked it, and some people were very critical of it.
Audiences enjoyed it. Fans of the book enjoyed it. But critics,
because that's the other thing is you got to remember, like I mentioned before, there's nothing like this ever existed.
Exactly.
Peter Jackson in interviews said he was inspired by this movie.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
He took some visual inspiration from this film because he loved it as a kid. He said he loved it as a kid.
That was one of my positives of this movie, was seeing all of those visual references that Peter Jackson took from this.
Which apparently Bakshi's bitter about that, which is weird. Because
there were a lot of direct visual scenes that you could tell Peter was like,
in terms of like blocking and staging and how the scene looks. I think he took this movie as kind of a visual map or blueprint to kind of stage some sequences. Yeah. Which I don't know why Bakshi would be so upset about that. I don't.
Well, he took it from the original books, you know. I mean, obviously he created this whole, you know, landscape and, you know, the art in his mind, but it's like he had something to reference it off of too. So it's like, I don't know how, like you said, I don't know how he could be upset from that.
Yeah. That was my last thing I wanted to say about it, was just Peter Jackson's influence. But Daniel, what was your like overall thoughts of this? Did you?
Yeah, I don't know if you quite said yet, Daniel. Mike and I talked quite a bit, but what did you think?
Oh, you guys are good. I like sitting here listening to you guys too, because you guys are more, you know, you guys studied this and really, you know, get into it more detail than I do. But I mean, I did enjoy this more than the original Hobbit that we watched.
Yeah, I did too. Hobbit. Again, I don't think this is a great movie by any means, but I liked it a little bit more.
Yep, I would agree with that. But it did a good job, kind of like you guys were talking about, of touching on, you know, like certain points to make sure that it was following the storyline very well. Again, I don't think it added any unnecessary, you know, jargon or scenes that weren't from the actual, you know, storyline. But like I've mentioned before, how Mikey brought up the fact that, you know, there's a lot of wasted time, but that was just the way they chose to, you know, portray the art. So there was some wasted time. It was interesting, and I looking at the characters here too, just like, you know, comparing them to Peter Jackson's version. But like Aragorn, it was weird, you know. Aragorn, I liked how they kind of portrayed Aragorn, but I don't know if this is accurate. Maybe you guys want to, like chime in, but he looked almost like, and now it's not a good or bad thing, but it's just the way that he looked to me. He looked like he was almost like a Native American. I don't know if he looked like that to you.
Say which character again? You said
Aragorn.
Okay, I'm glad you're bringing up him because another one of my complaints about this movie were some of overall, I actually like the character designs in this film overall than The Hobbit in terms of like just in general. But there were some that I hated.
Aragorn was pretty bad.
Didn't like Aragorn's character design. I hated the character design for Sam.
Oh yeah, just a dummy.
They make him like a bumbling fool.
Yes.
And he looks like a moron. Like they make him look like this.
He's the only one.
Like
he's the only
fool.
Character. He's the only character that looks like that. I couldn't figure out why. It's like, I mean,
he's not like that in the previous animated film. They didn't do that in The Hobbit. I was like, oh well, excuse me. I'm an idiot. Sam's not in The Hobbit. But I guess I should mention the next film we're going to talk about because it's the same studio. How they animate Sam, the other studio animates Sam in their next film, which we'll talk about here shortly. I thought was fine, but this movie, Sam is horrible. So is Aragorn.
He had like big buck teeth, and he was fat and bumbly and dumb, and
I was like, "This is awful. Why? Why did you do it like that?"
Yeah. Why didn't you like Aragorn? His character portrayal.
He was very flat and plain, and didn't really have like
he didn't
really have like any standout costume designs. Like,
have you guys read the Lord of the Rings books at all? Have you guys read the Lord of the Rings books at all?
I haven't. I've tried to read The Hobbit, and I got through to chapter 2.
Okay.
And I reread the thing 8 times.
So you guys haven't read like the Fellowship of the Ring before?
No, I haven't read any.
I've read bits and pieces, but not the entire Lord of the Rings. So
like even in the Fellowship of the Ring, like what's crazy in the Fellowship of the Ring, and this was something I read the books after I saw the movies, all of them. The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, I never read them until I saw those Peter Jackson films. And I remember the one thing that's crazy about Aragorn in the Fellowship of the Ring, he's not even mentioned as Aragorn for pages and pages. He's Strider, and he has this weird like aura around, like he's very dark and kind of foreboding character in the book. Like he's very eerie, and the Hobbits even mention, like Frodo mentions a lot, like they're very scared of him. And I don't feel that in this movie. They do that well in Peter Jackson's films, of making him this it's not long. It doesn't last long. In the books, it's kind of stretched out for a long time that he's this very kind of eerie, dark character. And he doesn't become more personable as Aragorn until much later. But this movie, like, right from the get-go, I'm like, this is such a weird depiction of his character.
I didn't mind it. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. I thought the way they portrayed him as far as his attire, Mikey, it was awful. I thought it was awful. He just wore like a little, it was like it's like a little.
His get up was bad.
Yeah, it was awful. I mean, you could see like almost up to his crotch and stuff. I mean, most of us, I was just like, what's going on with this?
His voice acting at times, I thought he actually sounded like the guy that played Aragorn.
Viggo Mortensen.
Oh, Viggo Mortensen.
Like there were moments I was like, ooh, like he sounded like Viggo. I wonder if Peter Jackson like tried to find someone with that voice for his movie. Yeah. But I thought the voice acting was pretty good on his character, as well as a lot of the other characters.
Yeah, I really liked the voice acting in this.
Yeah.
I thought the character designs, other than those two I mentioned, Sam and Aragorn, I thought the character designs were pretty good. I liked I thought Gandalf was pretty great in this. I like the orcs, even though they rotoscope all the orcs. I think it adds kind of a really creepy, like scary element to the orcs that like you can't really even see their faces. Like their eyes are glowing, and they're these weird rotoscope characters. I kind of like that for the orcs. I wish he would have I wish he would have been more selective, like you mentioned, instead of jumping around with that process. Like, if he would have just used it for like the orcs and just the riders, the Nazgul, that might have been more effective, opposed to like even the traditional animated characters like the hobbits. Like sometimes they're traditionally animated, sometimes they're rotoscope. Like that's really off-putting and weird.
You needed to pick one and go with it instead of jump around the board.
Like maybe use that type of animation for just certain characters instead of jumping back and forth with all the characters. I don't know.
I thought
The
the
other
orcs
thing-
were good at a distance. When they got up close, their costumes were very poorly made. You could tell they were super low budget, like Halloween USA, just kind of stuff thrown together. And then
Nothing like the Peter Jackson movies.
They do the solarization so you can't see like what it really is. Like I'm pretty sure one of them was wearing just like a standard ape monkey mask from like a Halloween store.
Yeah, I wonder if you like hope that people would notice that kind of stuff. I'm sure in 1978 people might not notice those kinds of things.
No, exactly. It was much blurrier back then. So
yeah.
They were bizarre.
But from a distance, I thought that worked well, like having the huge massive solarized orcs kind of moving in the distance. I would have been okay with, like you said, certain things being solarized throughout, but it was just all over the board where they decided to use that.
I thought there's two things I want to touch on quick. So compared to the Hobbit, and I know it's two different ways of going about it, but I thought that Gollum, I thought he was more terrifying in the Hobbit. Like he is just like this wretched, just creepy looking creature. And this one, not so much. Not so much, but his character portrayal was much better. At least compared to the Peter Jackson version than the original Hobbit. I can't speak for how Gollum was portrayed in the Lord of the Rings, but Vincent, you've read the books and stuff. But which portrayal of Gollum do you think is better? The one from the Hobbit or this one?
So in the books, they're very specific about him having once been something like a Hobbit, and Peter Jackson, those lines from the novels he has in voiceover. And Gandalf mentions it in the Peter Jackson films. He wasn't much different from a Hobbit once.
Yep.
Right.
And they show it in Return of the King.
Yeah.
The live action.
That's directly lifted from the books. I mean, that's how he's described. Is he used to be a Hobbit and he's been twisted and deformed by the ring. That's one reason why I didn't really like the Hobbit 1977 portrayal, because I don't think he looks anything like a Hobbit. He looks like a frog or like I don't even know. In this movie, I think his character design resembles that a little bit closer, but then the voice performance.
Oh, that was the worst voice.
Weird.
He's like worst voice performance of this movie.
Yeah, he literally goes Gollum, Gollum, Gollum.
Well, he had this weird. He was like, "Ooh, I'm Gollum." Like he had I don't even know how to explain what his voice tone was. He was like, Gollum.
Instead of "What's precious."
Yeah, I don't know.
He goes, Gollum, weird. He'd be like, whoa, what's taters, precious? That's how he would say.
It was like an Austin Powers British Gollum.
It's not
like
good.
That's how I would describe it. He sounded like a British Gollum.
That voice performance is bad.
Yeah,
I like the voice performances overall in this film better than the Hobbit, though. I think the voice performances in this movie, I think they got actors. I think that's one of the things. I think he got actors for this movie because he was filming a lot of it live action. But just overall, there's more variety in the intonation of their voice, the emotion, the delivery. Just the overall voice performances as a whole in this movie, I think, are superior to the other one. But Gollum sticks out as being whoever did that is
terrible.
Bad. Granted, again, Andy Serkis set a pretty high bar years later, but I think even without that ever existing, that this is just not good.
So the other thing I want to bring up too was kind of going off to into the mythology a little bit and how they pronounced certain names and places. And
we talked about this on Zoom when we were watching these movies.
Yeah. I don't know if what's correct, what's not correct, if this is just like this director's interpretation of it or how it worked out.
But even in the next film too, which is different people involved, like all these films, the pronunciations, there's a very obvious difference from how things, places and names and locations and events are pronounced in these films compared to the Peter Jackson films. So again, is it a situation where like they didn't bother to seek out people who were close to Tolkien? His son, I don't know if you guys know, I don't know how familiar you are with Tolkien, but his son is like basically took over everything. He helped finish some of his works. His son is like the foremost knowledgeable person on all things Tolkien. So I'm pretty sure he was a consultant on the Peter Jackson films. So I would like to believe that Peter Jackson, with the due diligence he took with all of his films, probably took the time to get people from the Tolkien estate, and I believe Tolkien's son, to help him with pronunciation of all these things. The animated films, I think they're wrong. Some of the pronunciations.
It wouldn't shock me if they were wrong. It wouldn't shock me. Minus Tirith.
That one always that. Or what was the other one?
Ahriman. They didn't even pronounce the S. They just kept calling him Ahriman.
They said Saruman like once or twice. It was weird. They went back and forth a couple times. It was because I watched with the subtitles, so I had the subtitles on. But I don't know. I
can't remember. If you watch it and you know the mythology well, you'd be able to go back and pick up on a lot of different stuff they mispronounced, and that's what kind of was like. It was just shocking to me to hear some of these things that I thought were kind of just kind of basic pronunciation, just said completely different.
Yeah, it was very strange. Yeah, I don't know. And it wasn't a lot of terms. It was maybe like 6 things I noticed, but they stood out because they were so noticeably different. But yeah, that was another thing that was very bizarre.
Indeed.
I liked the music a lot more. I know this wasn't a musical like the 1977 Hobbit, but the music in terms of the themes and motifs and the overall tone and mood, I thought fit better with the source material than what we had in The Hobbit. Personally, I liked it better. But
I guess I didn't really notice the music, which some people say if you don't notice the music, that's good music. But
I don't think it. I think it pales in comparison to what Howard Shore did. Obviously, I don't think it's any. I mean, his is just. I mean, that's some of the greatest film compositions ever made. But here I thought it was good. I thought it was good. To me, it was. I noticed it because I really didn't like a lot of the music in the previous one, so I was kind of listening for it and picking it out. But I want to. If you guys have more you want to add, that's we can get to it in just a second. But I want to read this for the sake of our conversation. But I also want you guys to hear this. So this is on Wikipedia, and I know Wikipedia sometimes can be, take it with a grain of salt. They source everything that's on here. Supposedly, this is all quotes from Bakshi. Supposedly, this is all quotes in terms of referencing the Peter Jackson films, his perspective, around the time they were coming out. He claims Warner Brothers approached him with a proposal to make a part 2 at the time that these films were in production. The Peter Jackson films, but he complained that because they didn't involve him with the live action films, and then he refused. After the films were released, Bakshi said that while they were on the quote creative side, he does quote feel good that Peter Jackson continued. He begrudged one of the producers for not notifying him of the live action films. He said that with his own films already made, Jackson could study it. I'm glad Peter Jackson had a movie to look at. I never did. And certainly, which there's truth to that. And certainly there's a lot to learn from watching any movie, both mistakes and where it works. So he had an easier time than I did and a better budget. All true statements, I would say. But it gets better. Bakshi had never watched the films. He saw the trailers, and while he praised the special effects, he said Jackson, quote, didn't understand Tolkien and created special effects garbage to sell toys, saying his own film, Bakshi's film, has more heart, and that had he had a similar budget, he would have made a better film. It keeps going. Bakshi was told the live-action film was derivative of his own, blamed Jackson for not acknowledging this influence, which is not true. He's acknowledged it in interviews. Peter Jackson did say that the first film inspired him to go on and do the series, but that happened after I was bitching and moaning to a lot of interviewers that he said at the beginning that he never saw the movie. I thought that was fucked up. Bakshi then said that Jackson mentioned his influence only once as PR baloney. Jackson, who took a fan photograph with Bakshi, Jackson took a fan photograph with Bakshi in 1993, remains puzzled to this day about Bakshi's indignation. In 2015, Bakshi apologized for these remarks, and his animator said that he praised the live-action films years later. Very interesting series of events there. Quotes from Bakshi.
Sounds like this guy's all over the place.
He sounds like he was initially very butthurt. Yeah, just like his animation. So yeah, I had to read that for you guys because I read it and laughed when I was reading it. But
yeah, jeez.
Do you guys have anything else you want to add about this film?
No,
I don't really have anything else to say. I can't think of anything else that I didn't say.
I think I'm good. I probably honestly won't ever come back and rewatch this one. Like I
really,
said,
to me, this is the one I would rewatch out of the three.
I mean, with so many elements like visually similar to the live action, I'm just gonna watch the live.
Yeah. Oh,
see, that's
honestly,
Mike, yeah. That's my point. Is that like with the live action movies being so good, there's no reason to ever watch this one again.
Yeah.
But the reason that I would honestly agree with Mikey and watch the cartoon Hobbit again, I would watch it over the Peter Jackson version maybe, but I would watch it again is because I don't like the Peter Jackson Hobbit that much. There's just
and the Hobbit is short and sweet.
It is. It
kind of hits all the main points, and it hits them well.
Yep.
I think the only reason I would revisit either one of these films is with my kids, showing my kids, because I think from an animated standpoint, kids would have fun with it. I think the second one I would wait till a little older because I think it would kind of scare the shit out of them. The second one, I think Gollum and the Hobbit obviously is kind of freaky, but the Lord of the Rings, we already mentioned the animated one is, I don't know. I think you'd want the kids to be like older kids, like 8, 9, 10, not 4 or 5 or 6, but you know.
Right.
Anyway, with that, let's jump into the last film we're going to talk about tonight. And I don't think we'll be talking about this one long because I believe we all hated it. And we watched this one together and we lamented and groaned and complained together on Zoom watching this one. And it is the 1980 sequel to the 1977 Hobbit film called The Return of the King.
Can I introduce it with a quick song?
Absolutely.
Frodo and the Nine
Fingers. Oh gosh, man.
And the Ring of Doom.
For those of you listening, if you've never seen this movie, the movie literally opens, not literally, but there's pretty early in the film that song is being played. It's like,
and
hold on, let me finish introducing.
Okay, yeah,
let me finish introducing this movie, and then we're gonna rip it apart. So
maybe I'll just interrupt you with that song, like the movie interrupts itself with that song constantly.
It does. So this is also a television film. So just like the 1977 Hobbit film, this was on ABC. So the 1977 Hobbit film was NBC in 1977. This is May of 1980 by ABC. Same production studio, same animation studio, supposedly supposed to be a sequel to the 1977 film. This one's a little longer. It's 98 minutes, and it felt all of 90. I thought this movie was 3 hours. I mean, the ending could not come soon enough. So,
you guys were talking about the Lord of the Two Towers one, watching the clock. This was that right?
You mean the last one, the Lord of the Rings? Mikey,
yeah.
Mikey said he was watching the clock for the Lord of the Rings because that one's over 2 hours.
This one, it was unbelievable. I was watching. It was awful.
I got it on my phone. This was the only one of the three that I was on my phone.
Yeah,
I had a good time just like watching how ridiculous and stupid things were.
So bad.
I was like, what the hell are they going to do next? Because who knows?
So we got to talk about why it's bad. So we can't just call it bad and not explain why. So
Frodo and the Nine Fingers.
That song is played so many times. But to me, this movie's biggest problem is its general like presentation, narrative structure, and like the way it does its storytelling is so lazy.
Well, there's no
plot.
Lazy. There's no plot.
It's so confusing. The only reason that we talked about this while we were watching it together, the only reason we knew what's going on is because we're so familiar with the story already going into it that we could generally follow what was happening going on. But if you did what they wanted and watched the 77 film and then this is a sequel, you'd be like, what the hell? What? Especially kids, they don't know what the hell is going on. This movie jumps all around in terms of the story that's trying to adapt. It skips so many things, and a lot of what's that?
The characters involved, like,
oh yeah, But it's all
over the
exposition, it's all narration, it's all summary. There's very little scenes that are actually allowed to play out.
Dream sequences.
Oh my God, there's more than one dream sequence. It's weird.
It starts after everything is done. The movie starts at the very end of everything.
The story structure is weird.
Then goes into and then starts the plot, you could say, but then there's dream sequences that skip all over. You don't know whether it's at the end of the movie, after everything's done, or during the middle in a dream sequence. It's all over the place, man.
It's bad. It's really bad. It was received bad. So I looked it up too. Like, it was very poorly received, like when it came out. Ironically, though, the funny thing is, it has a higher percentage of a higher approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes than the last one.
Does it really?
Yeah, 67. This has a 67%. I feel like that's probably because it doesn't have very many reviews. Yeah, isn't that shocking?
I mean, more than Man of Steel. That's better review than Man of Steel.
Bullshit, man.
But you got to think, with a movie this old, how many critic reviews are even on there for this? It doesn't say on Wikipedia. I can't imagine there's very many.
What's the audience score?
Wikipedia.
Audience score would be recent. Critic scores they pull.
Wikipedia doesn't have it on there. I'd have to go look on other websites.
Dude, I bet audience scores would be below 20%. It would shock me if it was higher than that. Maybe even lower.
The director, listen to this quote from the director. We tried to do Return of the King. This is the same director who did The Hobbit, but it is an awful lot to put in. It's an awful lot to put into it. I think Peter Jackson is having the same problem in his films. You can't deviate from these books, or somebody will wait on the street for you. In Return of the King, we had to summarize what had happened before, then put it all together into 2 hours. You did an hour and a half. It's not a very good film. He even says that. Asked why he only chose to make The Return of the King instead of the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, Rankin admitted, "I didn't know that the audience would sit still for it. I was wrong." Wow. That's why I didn't read that quote earlier. So they literally just were like, "Oh, we did The Hobbit. We'll summarize most of the book and just play out some of the scenes from the end of the book." Like,
yeah, well, here's the summary. It's through a damn jester singing a song.
I know a lot of the summary is done in song sequences, and they're so awful.
Because the jester is telling Bilbo the story.
Yes, because Bilbo's some old senile
9 fingers every 3 seconds. God damn it!
Isn't that weird though? That's like, even reading the production notes, like they immediately said Hobbit. Okay, we're doing the Return of the King.
Yeah,
I don't know if part of it was like they figured with Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, like it would eventually be assumed as a spiritual sequel instead of a direct one, or if it was just like what he said. They were just like, production wise, we just don't think we have the time and money to do it, and people wouldn't watch it. Like, dude,
my favorite, if you were to
what a misfire.
If you were to have to pick one scene from this movie that was your favorite, what would it be? Mine was honestly when Frodo and Gollum were wrestling and he bites his finger off. Like,
oh, it's hilarious. I wish they
would have. The only thing that I was like, I could follow.
Those cowards, they didn't animate any blood. It's so weird. They just show like a half a finger and there's no blood. I'm like, oh, you should have had just blood everywhere. Like, come on.
That's the only thing that made sense, so that I knew what was going on. I was like, okay, this is the one part that I remember, reading about and watching, and everything else, nothing.
Well, they show the sequence in the tower in Cirith Ungol.
Yeah, okay,
Sam trying to save Frodo, but that sequence is so drawn out in this. Yeah. Like, it's drawn out even further because Sam has a dream sequence as he's going to save him.
1 of 7.
It's so awful. And then Frodo has a dream sequence after he saves him. It's like, oh my God, there's so much unnecessary shit. And it's like, you could have spent all that time fleshing out some more of the things you chose to just summarize.
Right. I would say the Minas Tirith stuff was some of my favorite.
Minas Tirith?
Oh, Minas Tirith.
Yeah, I hate that too. It drives me nuts.
But at the same time, like, it didn't even make sense to be in this. They didn't preface it with anything. They didn't talk about Merry and Pippin at all. Like, you didn't know who they were.
No.
None of it made sense. But the stuff that happened in Minas Tirith was actually pretty cool. And there were some giant armies that were fully animated, not using rotoscoping.
There were a few things here and there. That I was like, okay. okay, there's some sparks of like, okay, all right, and then they go back to Frodo and the nine fingers bullshit. I'm like, oh my god, it was. I mean, we all watched this together and we're just miserable suffering through this. I can't believe I paid $10 for this DVD. It's gonna sit on my shelf until I die.
Yeah,
I'm not ever gonna get rid of it. Who's gonna want to buy it? Might as well hold on to it as a collector's item.
Right.
It's just like, what?
Well, it's hard to come by, so
I was surprised I found them pretty easily on Amazon, but
you can't rent it on Amazon.
Yeah,
it's not on any streaming service.
No, this was the one. Yeah, the other two you could rent on VOD, but this was the one. Yeah, that you can't find anywhere in terms of VOD or streaming. You basically got to get a hold of it. There's no Blu-ray for any of these. You got to just get all that's available is the DVD. Mm-hmm. I would love to see like a Blu-ray remaster of The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings animated films. I'd probably buy them, but
I think it exists.
I couldn't find anything Blu-ray.
Oh, okay.
I looked. I looked. If it does exist, it might be a different region. It might not be Region A.
Gotcha.
It might not be North America. You probably have to order it from overseas or something. But yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about The Return of the King 1980 unless you guys do. I thought it was horrible. It's one of the worst animated films I think I've ever seen. I'd put it up there, which is unfortunate because the source material is iconic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so bad.
It's scale of 1 to 10.
I gave
2. I gave it a 2.
I gave it like 3. I think I gave it a 1.5 star out of 5 on Letterboxd, which is like a 3 out of 10. I did compliment a few things on this. I said, what did I write? I thought some of the animation was improved from the 1977. I thought there were some things animated wise that was good. I thought the voice acting was better, except the guy was back who did Bilbo and Frodo again. So I did think there was a few things in there that were okay animation wise and voice acting. Everything else I thought was really terrible.
Yeah,
so I gave it a 3 because to me a 1 out of 10 is like worst movie I've ever seen. I've seen movies worse than this. I have seen movies worse.
I gave it a 2 because, like I'm saying, it's not the worst movie I've ever seen, but it is pretty darn awful.
What'd you guys give the other two? What would you give the Hobbit out of 10?
I mean,
I would give the Hobbit maybe like a 7.5 out of 10.
Oh, okay, pretty high.
I would give Lord of the Rings probably a 5 out of 10. I would give this one to.
I'm exactly flip flopped on you there.
Yeah. One more thing about this movie. You mentioned the animation. I noticed that the backgrounds in this Return of the King were a lot lazier than in The Hobbit. I know it's a lot of the same animators and stuff, but the watercoloring, they didn't try to make these beautiful scenic backgrounds.
Well, and it's a lot of the same stuff too. There's not as much of a variety.
A lot of brown, a lot of rock,
same thing over and over and over. Yeah. It's very lazy.
It was very lazy. As far as the foreground animation, I'd say it was probably about the same as The Hobbit, like the characters moving and stuff. But the backgrounds, the watercolor seemed a lot lazier in this than in The Hobbit.
Yeah.
So.
Daniel, what do you got for ratings? What do you think?
I mean, the one we just discussed, I gave that one a 2 out of 10. And then I gave the Two Towers, I gave that one a 6 out of 10. And the Hobbit,
the Lord of the Rings,
or the Lord of the Rings, excuse me, yeah, Lord of the Rings, a 6 out of 10. And actually, I didn't realize this, but I gave the Hobbit a 6 out of 10 as well when I was going through it. So I gave them the same rating actually. But
do you have a Letterboxd account, Daniel?
I do not know.
Oh, okay, you gotta get a Letterboxd.
No,
Vincent, when are you gonna follow me on Letterboxd?
I'm a poor man.
I don't follow you?
No.
I thought I did.
Nope.
Well, I gotta rectify that right now. I swore I did. I'm gonna fix that right now.
Man.
You have to erect what right now?
Rectify, fix, repair. I swear. What the heck? How do I not? Oh, I don't. Oh my god, I'm sorry, man. There, I followed you.
No, I'm just kidding. You're all good.
Oh, I thought I did. Wow, I'm an asshole.
I've been liking your stuff, so you would follow.
I thought I've seen you like my stuff. I thought I was already following you. I don't know why I thought I was.
I think I have 2 followers. I'm just fucking around.
now you got me. I would give this one we just watched, the last one, a 3. I think it's the worst Lord of the Rings thing that exists.
Yep.
In terms of book to screen. I would give The Hobbit like a 5.5, maybe. I would give the Lord of the Rings probably a 6.5, 7, somewhere in there. I'd have to rewatch it to kind of confirm my feelings on that. But
I'll just really quick. I'll keep my original rating for the first for the 2 out of 10 one, but then Lord of the Rings, I'll switch it to like, I guess I'll give that a 6.5 out of 10. I'll keep The Hobbit at a 6 out of 10. But if I were to rewatch any of them, it would be The Hobbit, kind of what we discussed before. The fact that there's such a good Lord of the Rings out there. Why don't we watch that?
Good point.
But I would watch The Hobbit probably.
I love your objective stance on that. It's a very, very thought out and objective stance in terms of your rating. So yeah, overall? So before we kind of wrap this episode up, what overall, personally, I'm pretty lukewarm on these animated films. Lukewarm to slightly positive because there's 2 of them I kind of like. One that's just god awful. That third one, I don't think I'll ever watch it again. Maybe to laugh at it with someone. I don't know. The first 2 I might revisit with my kids, but I'm honestly really excited to rewatch because I almost annually watch Lord of the Rings. I try to find time almost every year to sit down and watch Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. So I'm very excited that I have an excuse to rewatch it this year to do a podcast episode.
Yeah, I'm excited. These movies got me excited to watch the live action. I still have never seen the extended cuts, so I'm
excuse to finally watch them.
Yes, definitely an excuse to finally watch those. I enjoyed watching these. I enjoyed seeing old school art styles and failed attempts at new art styles. And
I don't regret watching these at all.
No, I don't regret it at all. It was cool to see a lot of the influence that Peter Jackson pulled from these too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
This was a cool intro into our live action debut in a couple weeks here. So,
and while Bakshi does kind of sound like a turd sandwich a little bit, at least he used to, I do agree with him that I feel like at this time had to have been an unbelievably daunting and intimidating task to try and adapt one of the most beloved novels of all time.
Yeah. Most studios, writers, and directors all said that people have tried, and they all said it's
not possible.
You cannot adapt this to screen in any format. And the guy that did The Hobbit and then Bakshi, I mean, they kind of proved them wrong in a way. They made their form of adaptation, and it was a good start into Peter
Good attempt,
Jackson.
good place, starting off point, good jumping off point. But Peter Jackson just took it and ran with it. And that's what we're going to get into, and probably in a month. It's going to take up some time, but Peter Jackson spent. I don't know if you guys are aware. Do you know he spent almost 4 years in just pre-production, before they even started filming the movie?
I did not.
So we'll talk about that, but he spent at least 3, I think maybe it was reported 4 years. 1997 was when he started pre-production work.
Did you know he spent 4 days of pre-production for the Hobbit movies?
That wouldn't surprise me because he knew he could just animate all of it at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, we're gonna get back together in I hope less than a month, but we're gonna have 10, 11 hours. We're gonna have 12 hours worth of movies to watch. So the three of us are gonna be trying to find time over the next probably 3 to 4 weeks, depends on when we can all get back together after watching them all. I'm looking forward to it. I'm really excited.
Question: are we going to be reviewing all of the Lord of the Rings in one go, or each movie at a time?
I figured we can do it all in one episode because, to me, these 3 films that we just talked about are so distinctly different. Whereas Lord of the Rings, in terms of Peter Jackson's trilogy, is so artistically, visually, it's basically, to me, it's like one movie, just like the book is one book. I mean, It all flows together. It might as well just be a 12-hour movie. 11-hour movie, whatever the extended total runtime. The extended edition's total runtime is, I think, somewhere around 11 hours. So it might as well just be one long movie. So I figure we can talk about it all together, because I feel like all of the things we'll say that we love about those movies or appreciate, or what do we want to talk about, we could apply to all of them, and we'll kind of break up maybe what we prefer or like more about one of the volumes or adaptations more than the other. But yeah, I figure we could do one. So
Okay.
We're obviously, the three of us are going to text, we'll talk, we'll figure it out, but we'll be back and discussing Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings 2001, 2, and 3. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed listening, and hopefully you watch these, I guess. I don't know. I don't even know if I'd recommend these to people. Maybe the first two I would be like, yeah, if maybe if you want to look, they're not that great, but if you want to check them out. I would absolutely say skip the third one unless you're like morbidly curious. I would say you don't have to watch that Return of the King crap. We did that for you if you're listening along. But otherwise, before we wrap things up, any other parting thoughts, guys? Otherwise, we can end this.
I think I'm good. Excited to see the live action stuff, and super pumped about the show whenever that decides to come out.
Same here.
Well, all right. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. Vince with the Film Nerd Podcast with guests Mikey Bear, Daniel Middleton, talking about Lord of the Rings. We'll be talking about Lord of the Rings quite a bit this year. Hope you join us for some other episodes, and we'll be back very soon. And until next time, go watch some movies.